Today's headline is Wild Night Among Cattle. The subheadline says, Frightful stampede in which hundreds were killed. It says, cattlemen in Nevada will remember this year as the worst they ever experienced in their business, says the San Francisco Examiner. They were so badly crippled by the havoc wrought by last winter's storms among their herds that they have not yet recovered from the loss, and the business activity of the entire state has been somewhat hampered thereby. More on this account than any other, several thousand purchasers of land from the Central Pacific have been given a year's extension on their payments. Of some 4,000 of these purchasers, only half a dozen made their usual annual payments. Recent estimates of the loss of cattle last winter run the number up to 250,000, and examples are numerous where out of a herd of 2,000, 3 or less were alive in the spring. This was Mr. I.M. Strawbridge's experience, while G.W. Crum saved but 1,750 out of a herd of 10,000. S.C. Denson and Frank Miller of Sacramento lost between 6,000 and 7,000, valued at $400,000, while others lost so many breeding animals that this summer some ranchers branded 1,000 to 1,500 calves, where for several seasons past they were in the habit of branding from 20,000 to 26,000. John Bradley was another heavy loser, and he had an experience with some of his cattle that he will never forget. One night in January last, 5,000 of his choicest, which had been driven in close to the headquarters of the ranch, where there were between 500 and 1,000 bales of hay stacked together in one huge pile and enclosed by a strong and high board fence, made a wild stampede and took complete possession of the hay. During the day, the cattle were given a small quantity of it, the idea being to keep them from utter starvation and make the hay last as long as possible. Men armed with sticks and pitchforks were stationed along the outside of the fence to more completely guard the provender, it being anticipated that in their hunger, the animals would make an onslaught on the fence to get at the coveted food. Darkness came on, and it was bitter cold. The night was clear and the snow deep on the grounds, and ever and anon sharp, piercing winds would mercilessly lash the poor dumb beasts, who in a solid phalanx on all 4 sides of the fenced hay stood a short distance away, shivering in their plight, looking at the hay and watching the men on guard. 2 hours before midnight, the wind increased in fury. It became a hurricane, with the thermometer below 0. The men on guard and their bundles of clothes were painfully cold. The cattle presented a grim aspect. In one great shivering mass, surging to and fro, restless with pain and hunger, but with their eyes still fixed on the big pile of hay. Their restlessness increased. The swaying movement of the big mass became more noticeable. The cattle in the rear, in a vain attempt to get away from the cruel wind, struggled wildly, rushing forward and fighting to oust those in front, until the whole herd took alarm and began moving toward the hay. Suddenly, with one accord, they bellowed loud and long, as if instinct told them that death was near, and then, in mad career, rushed blindly and furiously towards the fence. The guards, having no avenue of escape but on top of the pile of hay, swiftly climbed the fence and scrambled on top, just as the hungry herd made its mad charge. It was a grand and terrible scene, as the cattle rushed up to the fence, those in the front having their brains dashed out, and others being trampled on and killed by those charging on behind. The fence gave away, and around and up the pile of hay the herd moved on, so closely packed together that some behind were forced on the backs of those in front, while here and there were large piles of dead animals, from the top of which cattle stood frantically grabbing their food, only the next moment to be savagely attacked by others for a favored place. For an hour, the guards on top, with bated breath and frightened looks, watched this weird sight, and then yells for help, as the cattle pushed one another up close to the top, made Bradley and others, who had run out of the house when the cattle bellowed, think that the guards were being mangled beneath the hooves of the enraged beasts. For 2 hours they labored to drive the cattle back to rescue the guards, and finally succeeded in getting an opening for them to escape. But the cattle finished the hay pile, and a week later, all were dead from cold and hunger. This story came from the great state of South Dakota, being reported in the Mitchell Capital of March 25th, 1892. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, And remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.